Hello and welcome to the Inner Sense channel. I'm super excited today about this conversation with Nathan Oxenfeld. Nathan will be sharing his expertise on eye health and vision and some principles and techniques that you could really benefit from. There's a lot of crossover with Nathan's work and what this channel is all about, the topic of sensing changes in our bodies and using body awareness for well-being. I'll introduce Nathan in just a moment, but first of all, an invitation to subscribe to the Inner Sense channel for more up-to-date information about internal body awareness, that's interoception, and how to use it day to day. So Nathan is a certified Bate method teacher and founder of Integral Eyesight movement. He's an author of Give Up Your Glasses for Good, Holistic Eye Care for the 21st Century, and also the host of the Naked Eye podcast. Nathan, welcome. I'm so pleased you're joining us on the Inner Sense channel. Thanks for making the time, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So much, Ian. It's really good to be here. Appreciate you asking me on, and I too am really looking forward to this conversation. And yeah, quick correction: my practice is called Integral Eyesight Improvement. I love though how you said Integral Eyesight Movement, because movement is like one of the biggest parts of what I teach. So I think it's actually pretty fitting to call it that. But yeah, either way, I think it works. So
thanks for the correction. It was a slip of the tongue because I've got improvement written down. So, but yeah, maybe we'll hear about movement and how that relates to eyesight improvement.
Hopefully, yeah.
Before we sort of talk about the nitty-gritty of what you do, can you share a little bit about your background and your journey with your own eyesight maybe, and how that led to you studying the Bates method and founding Integral Eyesight Improvement?
Sure, definitely. Yeah, at this point, I do have this practice where I teach this and share it with other people and coach people through the process. But going back to the beginning of this, it didn't start with that. It was really just about me as a person needing glasses and contacts from childhood for my myopia and my astigmatism, and being introduced to some of these alternative approaches that we'll probably go through a little bit today, and being very curious, kind of equally skeptical and open to the possibility of maybe being able to experience better vision without necessarily having to do like a laser eye surgery, because I was definitely considering just getting LASIK, because I had met a couple other people who had gotten that surgery and they didn't need their glasses. But something about the Bates method and this more holistic approach and this kind of yogic approach to overall health and healing kind of drew me more in that direction, because it seemed like the surgery was sort of more of the quick fix thing, and it was sort of the short-term solution, not totally sure about the long term. Whereas the more holistic approach, it seemed at first that like, wait a minute, this seems like something that might not work as fast as like a laser eye surgery, but maybe it will actually last longer and will have more of a kind of long-term permanent effect. So I was really keen on exploring that. And I was in college when I first learned about the Bates method. And I had, like I said, I'd already been wearing glasses and contacts pretty much every single day of my life, starting at the age of 7 or 8. So elementary school, middle school, high school, most of college. And then right at the end of college was when I was learning more about these alternative approaches to health in general at first, and then more specifically about my eyes, and wondering if there were other things I could do about my vision problems. So within the first 3 months of me starting some of these Bates method practices and actually going without my glasses for the first time since I got them, because my doctor said to pretty much wear them all the time, never take them off. I was afraid that was going to like make my vision worse if I took them off. But some of the Bates teachings invites us to take the glasses off and relax and do some of these practices we might touch on today. Within those first 3 months, my prescription already decreased. So what the glasses that I started with were already too strong. They were overcorrecting my myopia and my astigmatism. So I had to go back to the eye doctor and get a weaker pair of glasses. And that was like the first time in my whole life that I needed to go down in the strength. I was so used to it just every couple months or every couple years, just, oh, time for another stronger pair. And it was like, oh, I guess that's just sort of the process of my vision deteriorating or my myopia progressing. That was just sort of normal. But so when my prescription started going the other direction, I got super excited and was like kind of hooked on like, well, how far can I take this, and why just stop with a quarter diopter improvement? Why not see if I can take a whole diopter down? That's like the minus or the plus number of your glasses and contacts. So yeah, it was like this gradual process. I did get those fast results in 3 months, but overall it did take me a few years, 3 or 4 years, to get all the way off my glasses and wean down my strength over time to the point of not needing them for anything. So it was this gradual transformation, but it was a transformation from having myopia and astigmatism to having clear vision without glasses and contacts. But once again, it wasn't like a laser eye surgery. It wasn't like overnight kind of thing. It was this lifestyle change and really looking at our habits, changing my vision habits in a big way. So, that's just a little bit about how, this all started just with me personally, like testing it out on myself.
Yes.
And then obviously once it worked for me and I was literally seeing my eyesight improve month by month, year by year, like I got naturally excited and inclined to just talk about it and share it with people. And so I ended up working with a vision teacher and trainer and got certified as a Bates method teacher, and then started this practice and began pretty much showing other people what worked for me, what didn't work for me, and kind of coaching people through the process. Since it is more of a gradual long-term thing, sometimes it's easy to feel a little lost or a little demotivated. So, having some sort of coach or guidance, I think, is usually super helpful. It helped me a lot on my journey. So I started solo and then I got some help from a teacher. So yeah, it's a little bit about how my vision improved personally. And then I started the integral eyesight improvement, and then just sharing videos on YouTube and these podcasts and documentary and really just trying to get the word out there that this exists so that people can make a decision, like if they want to pursue it or if they would prefer to stick with the traditional route and wear glasses and contacts. And that's fine if that's their choice. But I think people need to know that there are options in order to make an educated choice. So
yeah, being open to options. And I really quite struck by that story because it started so young for you at 7 or 8 years old. And there's me personally, I'd say that if someone develops problems with their eyesight as an adult, and it's they can maybe pick up on it sort of there and then when they're noticing the gradual changes, and but it's something that's been there as a habit, as you say, from the age of 7 or 8 years old, instinctively or heuristically, I think that would be harder to change because of that habit has been there for so many years. But there's so much of what you just said. I'm sure we could spend a whole day, or I guess some of your conferences and stuff go on for multiple days, talking about all those different aspects of what you talked about, because it's not just in your field of eye care, but I think any kind of holistic approach where we're really trying to make something a lifestyle change, and to change something that has been a pattern that has been habitual, and then to embed in a new habit does take a lot of effort. And it's, as you said, it's not just a quick fix, but maybe there are other benefits to, other than just the goal of eyesight improvement for people's overall health. And hopefully we'll talk about the idea of strain and the kind of effect, the idea of mental strain and how that might affect vision as well. So yes, let's dive in. Can you just explain a little bit about the main premise of your work then? It started with the Bates method, but I guess things have moved on from there in a little bit as well with your sort of signature approach?
Yeah, well, that's a good point, because the Bates method is the foundation that is referring to a specific methodology developed by an ophthalmologist named Dr. William Bates, who lived from 1860 to 1931. So this was developed 100 years ago. So it was early 1900s where this like renegade ophthalmologist was experimenting and doing this research and making these discoveries about what's really possible with doing these better vision habits, like you were just insinuating. And you actually said the premise, you said the main premise of the Bates method is that pretty much all vision problems are caused by strain, specifically mental strain. And the whole premise of the Bates method is that if strain is causing vision problems, then the opposite of strain, which is relaxation, is therefore a potential remedy for these vision problems. So the entire Bates approach is based in relaxation, achieving a state of physical relaxation of our eyes so that our eyes feel better physically, but more importantly, mental relaxation so that we're finding a different way to deal with that mental strain so it doesn't manifest in a refractive error like blurry vision or maybe some sort of fusion problem where the eyes aren't working together as a team, like we get double vision or misalignment of the eyes. So many different complications can kind of manifest from that mental strain. And that's why I love the Bates method, because he had this other premise that vision is 9/10 mental and 1/10 physical. So it really helps us question what is the best approach here to work with our eyesight, which is a physical sense, but your vision is technically happening in your visual cortex in your brain. So it's really a mental phenomenon. I mean, it is dependent on light entering the physical eye organ, but after that, it's really much more about how the light is transducing into this chemical signal. It's getting sent this electrical impulse through the optic nerves and stimulating areas in the back of the brain, and how we interpret the light, how we perceive the world. So that attracted me to Bates's approach, because it wasn't so much about like, oh, well, what's wrong with your eyeball? It's too long, it's too short, it's physically imperfect in this way. But Bates was more about like what's going on behind the eyes, what's going on with your thinking and your beliefs and your memory and your imagination and these other aspects of vision that usually kind of get left out of the conversation because we approach it kind of more physically sometimes. And that is kind of a big mistake people make when they first either learn about natural vision improvement or even start trying it themselves, is they'll take a little bit too much of a physical based approach, doing eye exercises and looking left and looking right and kind of working the eyes out. But that's not the Bates method. The Bates method is more about how do we release the strain and how do we adopt more relaxed vision habits. Because if we think about people who have perfect vision, they don't need glasses or contacts. They're not squinting, they're not straining, they're not, they're demonstrating good vision habits. Usually they're blinking, their eyes are shifting more. They're not putting a ton of effort into the seeing process. It's more automatic and effortless, kind of like the sense of smell or touch or taste. So yeah, it's the Bates is definitely my main platform, my main approach. But since it has been a century since Bates passed away, there have definitely been additional discoveries and more research has come out and in the field of neuroplasticity, and so I definitely incorporate newer things as well, but my background is also in yoga, so it also goes farther back than Bates as well, and I like to get inspiration from even more ancient teachings that have worked for even a lot longer as well.
Yes, yeah, and I hope we can talk about some of that later, the idea of eye yoga. And I know you sort of will maybe cover the topics, but palming is something I saw was part of Bates' method, and I'm familiar with that from yoga classes. Teachers encourage us to palm. I'm pleased to hear that you have a background in yoga. I've been a big fan of that for over 2 decades now, and I work as a manual therapist. So, I see this confusion as well often, that, or not so much confusion, but a conflation of the ideas of relaxation and efforting. So in the sense of, someone will think, oh, I must try harder to get stronger if they've got a lower back problem, or they think I need to strengthen, I need to strengthen something if I've got sore shoulders or hips or back. They assume it's a weakness rather than an excess of tension. And I think that's so prevalent in the way we talk about our bodies. And the other thing you're saying about this, sort of, you use the word refraction error, and that just made me think about the latest neuroscience. I think there's so much, such an exciting time for this type of therapy in terms of understanding how mental models or mental processes affect the physical body. Because it used to be kind of woo-woo idea, or sort of fringe idea, that the profound effect that are the mental or cognitive aspects of or imaginative aspects of our life have on the body. Whereas you may be sort of familiar with this idea, and we've had a few people on the channel, of the idea of predictive processing or predictive coding, and that's that actually what we perceive or sense, or it is actually mostly a prediction. We're kind of predicting and correcting. So, if we're sort of part of that prediction is we need to effort or strain in order to achieve something, then that's what will happen, isn't it? And how do we correct that? So let's move on to maybe a few of the techniques, so that people watching or listening to this can hear what it's all about. So what does your approach actually involve? What do people have to do in order to relax?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny how that question comes right after, say, this idea of we are kind of conditioned or trained to think, if I want to achieve a goal, like whether it's getting rid of that chronic back pain, or that digestive issue, or the sleep problem, or the eye problem, whatever, we do go right to that, like, I got to try harder, and I got to do. And so the Bates method does give us like kind of a list of things that we ought to be doing, so to speak, in terms of our good vision practices. And I generally steer away from that word exercise, because it does sort of get us more into that mode of like, oh, it's time to try now. Like you already brought up one of the practices we can do, which is the palming. And the other concept you brought up is like, the difficulty might lie in the habit changing, right? So palming itself is not difficult. It's not hard to palm the eyes, but what is hard is to relax the eyes. So, because people can palm their eyes and still strain their eyes. Like I did that for a while. I actually made this mistake where, palming simply involves covering the eyes with the palms, so that there's really no light, or as little light, reaching the eye as possible. So it's not like pushing on the eye. Some people misunderstanding it, they're like pushing or putting pressure on the eye. No, we don't want to actually touch the eye. We actually like cup the palms and actually just block all the light. But what I did for a while when I would first start to palm is I would think, okay, it's time to relax. So I would just kind of stop my eyes. I would just kind of put them in park, because I sort of thought that would relax them. But when it comes to the eyes, they actually are more relaxed in motion rather than in stillness. And so I was palming, I was doing this good relaxation practice, but I was still staring. My eyes were just stuck. And so I was still straining. So I wasn't truly relaxing. And that's, to me, like, I also was introduced to palming through yoga first. So it was like, I would go most of the yoga classes, I was trained in integral yoga. All the classes would start with the yogic eye movements, looking vertically, horizontally, clockwise, counterclockwise. And then we would rub our hands together and we would palm for like 30 seconds. And then we would just lower the hands back down, and then we would move on with the class. And I was like, oh, that feels kind of nice. I've never stretched my eyes before or done this palming thing. But it didn't really mention that thing about are you staring or are your eyes moving? And that's kind of what the Bates method filled in. So that's kind of the cool thing about the Bates system, is some of these things do seem familiar from like other practices. Like another one is the swinging, where you would actually like stand up and do a big body swing, like 180 degrees. Your arms are just kind of swinging alongside your body, and you're just kind of scanning the space, whether you're inside or outside. And that's kind of like from Qigong or Tai Chi, these kind of martial arts movements, which I had done before, but there was no mention of what are my eyes supposed to be doing. And that's what the Bates method teaches us, is when we swing, we're supposed to be observing. It's called oppositional movement, where we actually start to see things moving in the opposite direction, which was another mistake I made when I was first swinging. I was like, okay, I'm supposed to swing and it's supposed to feel good, but it didn't feel good because I was still staring. And I was trying to stop the movement, and I wasn't really letting things move. And so I was, from the outside, it looked like I was doing my good swinging practice, but on the vision habit level, I was still holding on and staring and straining. So I think that could be one of the reasons why some people might try some of the vision improvement things, or even some of the Bates things, and they don't get results. And it's usually those kinds of reasons, like it's sort of an incorrect way of actually doing the practice, or not a full understanding of how to do it properly. So I think that's where like having my teacher really helped me point out, like, oh, you might be doing this wrong, or try it this way. And it's like, oh, this feels completely different. Because when you swing and let things move, it feels so relaxing, and your eyes start to shift and vibrate more, which increases the circulation, loosens up that tightness in the eye muscles, and the strain starts to melt away. And then we get these clear flashes where without our glasses or contacts, we get better focus, and it's temporary, but like the vision comes in and out, it clears up, it gets blurry again. But that's really how these practices work, is we're kind of gradually releasing that tension and strain to let that flexibility come back into the eye, instead of just wearing the glasses, which kind of fix the eye into that one sort of prescription state.
I think, you mentioned Qigong there. So, and as much as I love yoga, the difference, the subtle difference between a practice like Qigong and yoga, I say, is that, because I teach a movement class once a week as well, that, with yoga, often this isn't necessarily how it's traditionally taught, but it's often the focus is on, getting a perfect posture and getting the alignment just right. And people often strain, to stay frozen in that posture, whereas, as you said, Qigong is about flow, essentially, isn't it? And feeling that, which is an interoceptive experience, that kind of flowing, continual flowing movement. And when I heard about the Bates method long ago, and I was curious about it, but I think also overlooked some of those subtle differences you just talked about. And it wasn't until, I got the idea about strain, but it wasn't until I think I was having some cranial sacral therapy, and rather than me palming, what the cranial sacral therapist was doing some work for my sinus at the time. So they had their hands over my face, and they were applying these kind of fascial twists, and I suddenly felt something inside. It felt deep inside my skull and sinus and head just suddenly melt and soften. And then I was like, oh, okay. The inside of my head isn't this solid kind of fixed object. It can be kind of gooey. And then revisiting the idea of the Bates method, I kind of thought, okay, our eyeballs are just floating in all this connective tissue. And if it becomes rigid, then maybe things, we end up with difficulties. And but then, to know that logically, and then to also experientially feel something softening is different. And I think that can be true on any part of the body, guts, this kind of clenching in your guts, clenching in your hips. Even an osteopath drew my attention to clenching on the top of my foot, which I just thought was skin and bones. But, all these, it's, so how do you, how do you encourage, is it mostly verbal cues to encourage people to kind of develop that sort of idea of softening, or do you have any other tips?
Yeah. First of all, that's an awesome story to feel that deepness of it, and really, because so much of the time, especially with our eyes, we're kind of on the surface, and a lot of vision teachers actually talk about this concept of seeing from behind the eyes. So yeah, there are these kind of verbal cues that get us to think differently about our perception of sight, our sense of sight. Like for me, for example, since I grew up with myopia, I had this tendency, since I could see clear up close and blurry far away, I had this tendency to want to, reach in and get closer to things, and try and like grab things and pull them towards me. And that's where the squinting comes. I'm trying to pop my eyes out of my head and like try and see it. And so this idea of, well, why don't you try seeing from behind your eyes? Okay, well, now instead of being all up in the front of my face, kind of being like that, I can sink back. And now all of a sudden, instead of my chin jutting forward, I'm actually finding this better alignment in my whole spine. And I sit back and I relax. And now I allow the light to come to me, because light travels a lot faster than humans travel. So just let it come into the eye. And then all of a sudden, it's a more relaxed, kind of receptive way. And just like you were talking about, identifying these parts of the body where you had no idea that you were holding on to some chronic tension or strain until it's gone and you feel the absence of it. But that's really, I think, what the Bates method provides us, lots of different avenues to explore, because everybody's different. Everybody's clenching for different reasons. And so what works for Joe is not going to work for Susie. So it's like we try all these different little, a lot of them are mental techniques, like that seeing from behind the eyes. It's not a physical thing. I didn't do anything physically differently. I mean, my physical posture changed, but it was a result of just a different way of thinking.
So your whole body sort of started to stack up differently, did it, after you changed that? Okay. And where, right, just sorry to interrupt, as a 7 or 8 year old, where do you think you developed the habit of doing things in a kind of strained way? Was it learned from your parents or somewhere else? And would you say, maybe you don't know the answer to that, but if you do know, have an idea, was your reason one of the sort of common reasons that other people would develop eye problems at that age? Or is there, a big mixture of, is it very individual for people, or other kind of groups of reasons why people might start to strain?
Kind of all of the above, in a sense. I'm glad you're bringing this up, because I kind of want everybody to ask themselves that question, whether it's a vision related thing or otherwise. That was sort of a missing piece for me the first little while of me working on my vision. It was a little bit more about just what practices do I do in the day-to-day kind of thing. But when I started to work with my vision teacher, she invited me to go back to 5, 6, 7 years old and ask these kinds of questions, like, why did I develop myopia at that time? What were the different contributing factors? Because I grew up being told that it was just genetic. It was like, oh, well, your eyeball's too long. You have a defective part. So the only option is the glasses or the contacts or the surgery. So I wasn't really questioning. I was like, oh, that's the answer. But with this more holistic approach that takes into account the emotional aspect, the psychological aspect, how we deal with stress. So yeah, I did spend a lot of time actually investigating my underlying root causes of myopia. And the kind of like blanket statement, like you were asking about, this kind of like group trend that tends to happen in the case of myopia, the emotion that we can boil it down to is fear. So that was my starting point when I went, okay, when I'm 5, 6, 7 years old, what was I afraid of? So that was my first initial list. What were my fears at that time? And I found a trend where it was specifically not just the fear itself, but it was the suppression of the fear. It was the bottling up of it and never letting it out. So it had to come out somewhere. So it came out of my eyes, and it blurred the world out in the distance, because the distance was scary. It was my protection, my defense mechanism was to create, this safe bubble around me where anything inside the bubble is good and safe and clear. But once you go out past that bubble, it's out of focus, it's out of range, it's out of my reach, and it's out in the blur, until the glasses get put on and it forces that scary thing into focus. And then we just have to kind of, keep ignoring that feeling that brought the blur up in the first place. It's like, oh, it's clear again. Like, I guess we just got to, go through it. And so that, to me, is what makes the prescription climb more and more, is the further suppression of the original root cause. So when I started taking my glasses off for the first time in my life, and asking these kinds of questions and getting back in touch with the why I developed the blur in the first place, it was actually pretty enlightening to help me realize, understand myself, and understand how that was a coping mechanism for the stresses in my life at that time. And even though I was, in college at that point, and I had sort of gotten over a lot of that stuff, guess what? I still had myopia. I still had astigmatism. And it was partly because I hadn't truly processed that stuff, but it was also partly because I was wearing artificial lenses every day that were keeping the myopia and the astigmatism in my life. The more you wear the glasses, it locks it in there. So, and I had a student once in Mexico. He told me that when he took his glasses off and spent like an afternoon without his glasses, it was the first time he felt certain emotions since before he got glasses. So it really can have this kind of numbing effect on our emotional state of like making it seem like everything's fine when everything's not fine.
Yeah, this is such an important conversation, I think, and we're sort of venturing into the realms of lots of other types of therapy and sort of psychoanalytic stuff and stuff, which is incredibly exciting to look at it in this context. I'm thinking as you're talking there, I don't want to get really critical of the education system, but I remember when I first learned to read, and finding it very difficult to not to see the words, but when I hear dyslexic people describing how they struggle to read, and that the words are jumping around and stuff, I remember being very kind of overwhelmed when I first saw a page of text at school, and taking it from, we'd gone from learning one letter at a time to then seeing a page full of text. And I remember being like overwhelmed by all these words, and then thinking, I didn't think it in these words, but just thinking, I need to, there was like a fear, or a kind of fear of doing something wrong or being wrong and wanting to please the teacher, and my parents being aware of this. And eventually, I was fine. I read really well, but that obviously that was a significant event for me, because I can remember it must have been 5 years old or something, and I'm nearly 44 now, and I can still remember that. So I think maybe the education system, what do you think about that, is the way that we kind of put these unspoken expectations, or even spoken expectations, on children to be able to get things right, and not be wrong.
Yeah, you're not far off. It's quite unfortunate, I think, that a large outcome of the education system, the outcome is poor vision for a lot of kids. And it was actually like proven through research, and this research did a good job at actually debunking the genetic theory that like myopia is genetic, because they studied Inuit populations, like pre-industrial to industrial, these three generations. The grandparents' generation, it was kind of the more traditional way of living, more tribal, more outdoor, more nomadic, out in nature more, very low incidence of myopia. And then the parents' generation was right when the compulsory education started to get introduced. And then we start to see more indoor time, artificial lights, and the myopia starts to increase. And then that grandchildren's or the children's generation, you see this huge significant spike because they are born into that compulsory education system. And there's no way that the myopia could, be handed down genetically in 2-3 generations like that. So it's like there is this unfortunate aspect of the education system kind of encouraging bad vision habits like staring and like escapism. Like a lot of kids maybe are either understimulated, so they just kind of are bored and they're not really engaged with it, or maybe it's a little overstimulating. And like your story there with like kind of the stress involved with the performance and all these other kind of social pressures and stresses. And Dr. Bates was aware of how poorly the education system was affecting, how strongly it was affecting these kids' vision. So he actually did start a program to implement the Bates method into public school systems in New York City and in North Dakota. And he had this really super simple method of preventing and reversing myopia in school children, of just having an eye chart in the front of the classroom. And the first day of school, the teacher instructs all the kids to read the chart from wherever they're sitting in the class. And it's a part of the daily curriculum. All right, let's all look at the eye chart. It's not a test. There's nobody there like calling you out. It's just let everybody read the eye chart. Within a week or two, all the kids memorized the eye chart. It's a familiar thing. Your story said you look at this unfamiliar page of text and the response is stress. Mm-hmm. If you look at a familiar page of text, the response can be relaxation. So Bates discovered that whenever we look at unfamiliar things, there's a higher potential for strain and stress and blur. And what is education? What is school if not being introduced to new unfamiliar things pretty much every day? So if you can have a familiar object in the front of the classroom, the eye chart, so that each day as the kid gets introduced to this new unfamiliar material, and maybe they have a trouble seeing it from their seat because it's blurry or it's just foreign, it's a new concept and they're kind of grasping it, they go to the eye chart, their vision clears back up because they know what it says. It's not a test. They're looking at their old friend, the eye chart, and they relax, and then they can take that clarity over to the unfamiliar part of the board, and then they can read it, they can see it, because they just calmed down by looking at the chart. And this was working so well in schools that kids were getting rid of their glasses, and like it was really, really working, but it got kind of shut down by the optical industry, or it was like they claim that you're not allowed to have a medical device in a classroom like an eye chart. But like it wasn't being used as you know what I mean. It's like, so but yeah, like that. I just love, so I loved how Bates was really focusing on that topic of education, school systems, and really seeing the importance of like the younger generation and how easy it is for them to just pick up bad vision habits if this isn't part of our normal conversation, which it isn't right now. So it's a little sad that this kind of stuff got removed from the curriculum, because if kids were just aware of how to take care of their eyes from the start, so many fewer adults would be in glasses right now. So it's there's definitely something to that.
Yeah. On that topic about the future generations having access to something else, I know you've done a phenomenal job in your YouTube channel, and resources have got a great following. Would you say that people these days are more open to this than they were maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or less so? Where is the trend heading, would you say?
I would say so. I do try and stay optimistic about it, but yeah, like I look around in the community and like there's more people showing up to these vision conferences that we have, and then we also like see people like Dr. Andrew Huberman, putting out this super popular podcast talking about how vision can improve naturally through certain neuroplasticity. And so, yeah, it does seem like hopefully it is becoming more part of the conversation with the help of the internet and these podcasts and YouTube videos and stuff. But yeah, it might be a different story when we're, that's kind of the general public, and people are obviously keen on this. They're doing a lot of their own individual research, and because this kind of stuff isn't necessarily always handed to you on a silver platter. So it always amazes me to meet the people who have found this on their own and really maybe even started to implement it and kind of take action on their own. But yeah, it might be a little bit of a different story when we're talking about the actual eye care industry or, the ophthalmological community. But yeah, hopefully that was one of my personal biggest takeaways of creating our documentary. We asked all these vision teachers around the world the same questions, and one of the questions was, what's your vision of the future of eye care? And I was kind of expecting kind of a negative response, or sort of like a doom and gloom kind of take on it, but everybody gave a pretty optimistic, positive view on it, of like, yeah, I could imagine, like a corner of an eyeglass shop having, a little vision therapy stand where you can, go talk to a vision therapist and ask questions, and like, just kind of have these two worlds come together and support each other. And like I said at the beginning, of just kind of like, you go see your eye doctor, here's the full list of options. You want glasses, you want contacts, you want surgery, you want vision therapy. Like it's just an option. It's not for everyone, but I think there's a lot of people out there who want it, and they would be keen on trying it out and seeing if they can get their vision problem, which could be kind of deteriorating or progressing in an alarming way, to kind of get that stabilized and under control. And like you insinuated earlier, Ian, it's like, it's not just about the eyesight. It's like also about these other lifestyle changes that are really helpful, and ways of just dealing with mental stress and strain in a healthier way. So yeah, it's like I said, I'm really impressed by the people who seek it out and then really do something about it.
Yeah. It would be lovely, if in opticians or centers for people who go, medical institutions that specialize in eye care, to have these options set out at the beginning, rather than automatically people being funneled down a particular route. And as you said, being offered different approaches and having those explained to you is a good thing. I see similar sorts of possibilities with issues with other parts of the body. So I'm just thinking, as you're talking there, about podiatry as well. So the idea of, if it's suspected that pain in your body may be caused by how your foot is landing on the floor, sometimes podiatrists will correct an arch by wedging something in the side of your foot to alter the how the foot lands on the floor. So that may be, I used those many years ago and it helped with some knee problems, but since my thinking has changed, and now I kind of view it as, in an ideal situation, you would just get the foot functioning better through kind of better alignment of the body and better functioning of all the articulations of all the bones and the connective tissue on the feet, and not rely on this, which is effectively like shoving a lens in front of your eye, but it's a wedge of something underneath your foot to fix it in place, when actually that movement, the ability to move and not be fixed is quite important. So there was something else I was thinking now about what you just said. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of eye yoga for a moment, because the yoga, sort of modern yoga, is often associated with just going to a yoga class and doing some asanas or poses, and then people go away and sort of carry on with their everyday life. But I understand traditionally, sort of yoga was about kind of union and incorporating the practice into everyday life and integrating it into your life, so that it's not just about the hour that you spend on the mat or whatever, that, you know, the wisdom tradition practices. It's not just about going to a ceremony and then separating that from the rest of your life. I saw in one of your videos, I think you said about it's about living the practice or internalizing what you do during the therapy or the approach practice into everyday life. Do you have any tips for people to kind of stay committed long enough so that these practices do start to integrate? Because from what you've just said and my experiences, it can take a while for that to happen, and easy for people to kind of become busied with other things and not find those little windows to practice, so that it becomes embedded as a habit.
Right. Yeah. I think it's really important to have these two categories in mind. Like, we've got maybe the practice category and then more of the habit category. And like we talked about the palming earlier, which is more of a practice because that is a physical thing. You're covering your eyes. You can't really be doing other activities while you're palming. You're just palming and relaxing and maybe visualizing. But to me, that's more of like the yoga class, right? It's like I'm on the mat, I'm doing my asana, doing my physical, my posture, I'm getting into the palming. But like you said, it's like, how do we continue to practice yoga off the mat in our everyday life? So to me, it's more like the habit category is what we need to focus on for that. And I really like the swinging that we talked about earlier as a good example of both practice and habit, because yes, as a practice, you can certainly be swinging your body, you can be swinging your head, you can be swaying side to side. There's a lot of different ways you can practice the swinging movements. But like I insinuated earlier, why are we doing that? Why are we swinging our bodies around? It's not just because it feels good to swing. It does. We get good circulation and loosen things up. But visually speaking, we're opening up to this concept of oppositional movement. As you swing from left to right, the room goes right to left. And when you go from right to left, then the room goes left to right. So it's this apparent motion of stationary objects, whether they're trees or buildings or walls or charts or whatever. As you swing your body, you can start to either see that, or a lot of people find it easier with the eyes closed to just swing gently side to side and imagine the room around you and the stationary objects where they are in space. They seem to move and rotate around you, like going from one cheek to the other cheek or one ear to the other ear. And it's just kind of this relaxing optical illusion that we can start to not only pay attention to when we do our dedicated practice and we're on the mat, so to speak, but then let's say we, have to drive to work and we're in the car. Guess what? You can swing, and not by going side to side, but just by seeing things move in your peripheral vision backwards. As you go down the road forwards, trees and everything goes backwards to your left and your right. Or even just walking down the street, right? Or like, let's say you have to cook some breakfast or some lunch and you're moving around your kitchen. You can be perceiving oppositional movement during your everyday activities if you're paying attention to it. It's like you said, it's easy to kind of forget about or get distracted, but that's how the Bates method works. We're practicing not just our exercises and practices, but we're actually practicing continuing to pay attention to these visual things while we're on the computer, while we're talking to people, while we're working. It's supposed to be this ongoing awareness. And it's so funny because right as I'm talking about this, my peripheral vision just noticed birds flying in the sky out my window. And that counts as me swinging. Just my recognition, oh, there's birds flying out in the periphery. Therefore, it's not as important for me to have to spend a few minutes doing my swinging practice because I'm already seeing the movement in my periphery. So it's like, how do we work with both the practice side of it and the habit side, where we're just kind of continuing to stay aware and present with our surroundings? That's kind of the cool thing about the vision work, is that by paying attention to your eyesight, your peripheral vision, the movement in there, it's keeping you in the present moment, right? Because if you're thinking about what you need to do later today, or you're, reflecting on what happened yesterday, you're not really paying attention to what's in your visual field. You're paying more attention to, that future or past thought. So simply by recognizing the movement in your peripheral vision, or just noticing, that swinging phenomenon, it's kind of keeping us more grounded and more present and more just in the moment.
Yeah. So it sounds like being present and in the moment is a really key part of the approach as well. Yeah. So we've got this kind of trying not to get caught up in strain. And then there's this sort of idea of being in the present moment. And then what else I'm sort of going to take from this conversation is the idea of staying in motion as well. So that's maybe implied by not straining, but you mentioned Andrew Huberman. He had someone on his podcast earlier this year who I'm a big fan of, a guy called Ido Portal. I don't know if you know him. He's a sort of Israeli movement specialist. Right. And what Ido was saying is that words get very tired. That we kind of rely on words and get stuck on words, and their meaning is maybe lost, or they become corrupt. And at that, in the interview, something that stood out to me with him was, he moved from talking about exercise or exercises to saying he's a movement practitioner and philosopher. And now he says even the word movement is getting, he's falling out of favor with that, and he's moving more towards the idea of motion, because you can be still, but still there's motion happening.
Yeah.
Inside you or around you. So he's favoring the word motion at the moment. And as you were talking then, he said you might be still driving in a car, or relatively still, but you're experiencing motion. That kind of, and so that's I think I'm going to take that away from this conversation, this sense of motion when avoiding strain.
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of reiterated that, because I think that it's important to really just clarify the why, because sometimes when I invite people to notice oppositional movement in their everyday life, they're not totally sure, like, well, why is that important? What is that going to do for me? And so the more we just understand that equates to a more relaxed visual system, and therefore that can lead to clearer eyesight and better functioning eye organs, versus if we're not aware of the movement. In other words, if we're staring, right? Because if you stare, if you don't move your eyes at all, you don't move your body at all, everything in the periphery looks very motionless. And that's just staring. That's a form of strain and tension and tightness. And that's how a lot of us live our lives, is in a state of chronic staring and straining, and thinking that everything is very motionless around us. So it's not just getting the eyes to move more, it's also about getting the mind to start to open up to perceiving the world moving more. And we need both of those for sure. But I really like that nuance there of movement versus motion, because what I'm getting from that is even the word movement almost brings me to more of the sort of a conscious place, or a voluntary place. Like, I have to move my eyes, like I have to, like the yogic eye movements, it's like that word movement. But then motion, to me, it almost brings me into more of like a involuntary or kind of unconscious place of like, oh, my eyes just have motion in them. And the world just has motion happening. It's just, everything is moving all the time. The planet's spinning, we're flying through space, or like you said, all the motion happening inside of our body right now, the heart, the lungs, the digestive system. It's like, that's just the motion that just exists. And I think that's the way that Dr. Bates explained this. And he invited people not to do the swing as an exercise, but to relax into the swing as your new perception. That's the new reality. And that's actually how people who don't need glasses perceive the world, as moving. Usually they're not aware of it. But Bates famously would study people who had perfect sight. He would like pick their brain and interview them about their experience. And when he would call their attention to the eye chart, they would all pretty much admit that, yeah, the letters look like they're moving. So there's this teaching in the Bates method that, you know, the motion of the eyes and the motion of the world leads to better health and better sight. So it's a really interesting, simple truth of the Bates approach, and probably lots of other healing approaches, is like, we need to let go and allow the motion and the flow to return.
And even as you've been explaining all of this to me, I find myself being more conscious of how fixed I easily get when I'm doing something like Zoom, which is, you know, I've got this square laptop in front of me, and then there's things I need to pay attention of, and I do seem to kind of freeze to a certain extent. But just this conversation has helped me stay a little bit more fluid, and to maybe shift my eyes away from the screen every so often and look at the other things in my room. I don't have to, you know, and you know, our conversation didn't fall to bits, and the computer didn't stop working just if I looked away for a minute.
It's funny, but that's on some deep level. A lot of people have that thought in their mind that if I blink or if I look away, I'm going to miss something, or I'm going to make a mistake, or like we spend way too much with our eyes just open and fixed, you know, for some unconscious fear that like the computer's going to explode, or, you know, like it sounds silly when we say it out loud, but I realize that in myself. It's like, wow, why am I staring so much? Why am I not blinking as much as I need to? And, you know, it just, yeah, it's so fascinating how this stuff can really come from some deep unconscious places like that.
Yeah.
Wow. But that's really good to hear, because that's really, I think the screen time is probably the most difficult time for people to really implement this stuff, because screens are kind of almost designed to suck us in and make us stare and decrease our blinks. So we do sometimes have to be really extra conscious during the screen time at first, until it does become a little more habitual. And I know that I needed to use timers to like actually hear noises, to take breaks. And but yeah, like that's, like I said, I saw the birds flying over the screen. Like I have a window right behind my computer screen so that my periphery is always being stimulated. And that's why I have this here. Sometimes, you know, I'll, for my vision students, you know, just have this thing spinning around, and, you know, just to kind of remind people to not stare, don't get stuck, look away, blink, you know. It's like, but it does require some like training.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm aware of the time. We've come up to the hour, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Where can people find out more about your work? And do you have any final remarks or things you'd like to share before we draw to a close?
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for having me. I've really enjoyed this conversation too. I think we've hit on some pretty important insights for the listeners, and also maybe some practical things. So my hope is that people actually start thinking about how they can be taking better care of their eyes, maybe like they think about how they brush their teeth or floss their teeth, you know, as a kind of a daily hygiene ritual. So it's like, maybe we can wake up tomorrow morning and palm our eyes before we get out of bed or before we start our day. And then maybe we palm our eyes again in bed before we go to sleep, you know. And just by adding in this little bookend to the day of relaxing in the morning, relaxing at night, instead of, for example, just grabbing your phone first thing in the morning, or looking at a screen until you go to sleep. It's like, that's the start of it. And then you start to feel some of the changes yourself, and maybe start to see some of the changes. That's really the ultimate proof of it. But yeah, if people are curious to learn more than what we covered today, I would say that my main website is probably the best place to kind of find all my offerings in terms of the YouTubes, the podcasts, the documentary, everything that's going on. And that's just integraleyesight.com. But yeah, I have a lot of fun putting out the episodes of the Better Eyesight podcast, where we actually read through Dr. Bates's original monthly publications that he put out for 11 years. So it's an 11-year podcast where we put an episode out a month, sort of like a Bates Method book club. And then the Naked Eye podcast is more kind of like this one, where we just have more chats with other practitioners and kind of explore these cool overlaps between our work.
Great. So I'll include links to all of those in the description for this video. So that was super inspiring, and it's encouraged me to take care of my vision a lot more, and just to kind of, as you say, treat it like brushing my teeth, as something that is something that you want to make as a kind of daily habit, and also the idea of integrating it in other times as well, other times throughout the day, so that it becomes the norm.
Yeah, thanks. I figured it would fit right in with your approach to health as well, in terms of kind of the awareness piece, and how it's not just about what we're doing, but how kind of the in between and how we're really implementing it. So I'm really happy to meet you today and learn more about your approach, and maybe we'll get to chat again deeper, and I'm keen to learn even more about your work and your clients as well. So
I'd love to speak again, because I think, as you said, bringing different practitioners together and seeing the overlaps, it helps us, well, gain more confidence about what's really going on, and also to maybe learn more new improvements to each of the work we're doing individually, and to share that with more people. So I'd love to speak again. Thanks very much, Nathan.
Thank you, Ian. Appreciate it.
Please remember to subscribe to the Inner Sense channel for more information about the role of your bodily sensations and tips for using bodily awareness to improve your well-being.